Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be reviewing Thunderbirds, Fire and Fury. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, Fire and Fury is the latest in a line of audio dramas based on the original, 1960s Thunderbirds. It's produced by Anderson Entertainment, and I've got to say a big thank you to Anderson Entertainment for sharing a copy of this release with me to review. The two stories featured on this release are adaptations of the comic strips from TV21, The Space Mirror and Blazing Danger. Produced with a full cast, sound effects, music, basically the authentic Thunderbirds experience, but on audio instead of on TV. Now, Thunderbirds comic strips I'm not the most familiar with. I read a lot of comic strips as a kid. I just never really revisited them as I was growing up. So what I did after I listened to these audio dramas was I actually took a look at the comic strips for Space Mirror and Blazing Danger as well. In these books, Thunderbirds in Space and the classic comic strips from TV21 collection. There are so many other comic strip books available that compile them all together. These are the ones that I happen to have. Anyone else have these books? I love the cover on this one, by the way. So I wanted to take a look at how well are the stories adapted? How do they compare to the comic strips? And it's interesting because these audio releases have to, as well as adapting the comic strip, they've also obviously got to be adaptations of the television series as well. And so it's kind of you're having to mash together these two kind of formats because the comic strips do things a little bit differently to the TV series. They tell a different kind of story because they have the scope to do that, and also they just treat the characters a little bit differently. So it was very interesting to sort of see how this audio drama kind of brought those elements together into something that felt authentically Thunderbirds. And I have to say that they do that incredibly well. The way that these stories are adapted really gives you the best of both worlds. You get the sort of enormous scope and grand scale that the comic strips offer, while also getting the characters sort of as they are, or as close to as they are in the television series, put together, and it just makes for an experience that feels like you are basically getting new 1960s Thunderbirds in your ears, and you can't really say better than that. So we'll start with The Space Mirror, which is on disc 1, which was adapted by Iain Meadows from the original comic strip. Quite a relatively short comic strip, so it results in a fast-paced adventure. I think the runtime is something just a little under 30 minutes, which is really, in those 30 minutes, so much stuff is packed in. It's really exciting. You get action sequences, all the Thunderbirds get involved in the situation. It's so big and bombastic. Not to spoil it too much for anyone, but the basic premise is there's an evil genius who has built a mirror in space in order to capture the power of the sun and use a heat ray to cause havoc, basically. And international rescue need to put a stop to it. And so when you've got that kind of huge, possibility for, storytelling, it's a type of story that never would have been told in the television series. And it's beautifully illustrated in the comic strip. How do you get that across in audio? Well, they do an incredible job of it, moving about from place to place, fitting it all in, but you still have a good sense of what's going on. It's a pretty straightforward story to follow, but they're just able to pack so much in because it's audio. You're kind of able to move from place to place quite quickly. This is one of the great things actually about it being on audio is you don't necessarily have to waste too much time on establishing what's visually happening. It can usually be summed up in a quick sound effect or a quick piece of dialogue. So it means that we can just kind of get on with the story rather than having to have a sort of grand establishing moment. There are a few of those, but for the most part, it's just like, let's keep the story moving along. And I think it really pays off. It makes it a very easy listening experience. I do sometimes struggle with audio dramas just because, you have to kind of take the time, I think at least, to best appreciate them. You have to kind of take the time to really sit and listen to them. I can't necessarily deal with just having them on in the background, so to have something that's really good at keeping the pace moving and keeping things moving along really helps me to just stay focused on it and really enjoy it. So I think that pays off really well in these stories, and the Space Mirror in particular just really goes along at quite a pace. So a few changes were made to the Space Mirror from the original comic strip. There's just a lot more detail added, frankly. The comic strip is so kind of short and quick. And obviously the amount of dialogue they're able to have is quite limited as well. So these little moments that are in the comic strip are kind of just unfolded a little bit and just explored a little bit more. That just makes for a really nice, engaging story. They made some tweaks sort of here and there to bits of the story just to, I think, actually bring them a bit more in line with what the television series would do. I'm not going to spoil the ending, but the ending of the Space Mirror comic just doesn't quite fit with the tone of the television series. And what they're able to do with this is just tweak it a little bit, just change the circumstances ever so slightly to make it kind of feel a lot more like a Thunderbirds ending, basically. So I think that works really well. The other sort of noticeable difference, I suppose, is that some of the genders on the characters have been changed. We've got a few more women in appearing in the cast, which I think is good. I think that's a good decision to make. Frankly, from an audio perspective, it's just a good practical thing to do because it makes the voices easier to distinguish apart, I guess. There's obviously benefits in terms of character, but just in terms of as a listening experience, it just varies things up a bit more, and I think that's great. And we'll talk more about individual performances a little bit later on, but there are some fantastic new interpretations on some of those guest characters, as well as really faithful performances of the main characters as well. Moving on to Blazing Danger, a lot of the praises that I had for Space Mirror are kind of the same. Blazing Danger is a little bit more in depth. It's a longer comic strip, but what they've managed to do with this is just kind of, better establish what is going on, frankly. Again, the comic strip just kind of moves through things really quickly because it's got a limited amount of page space to take up with all these panels. So what they do in the audio story is just really dive into things like characters' motivations and things like that, stuff that isn't really apparent in the strip. What they also do very well is give Penelope and Parker a lot more to do in this story, which is really nice. It's good to kind of bring those characters in because they're really popular. They do appear in the comic strip, but they don't do very much. So it kind of puts them in the center of the action, which is kind of exciting because obviously they're international rescue agents, but they're not necessarily going out on rescues all the time. So to kind of get them as inexperienced characters put into this dangerous situation when we, love and care about them, just really helps to boost the story. It kind of just takes it up to that next level. I love a good character-driven narrative, and what Blazing Danger does so well is, again, you're following the characters' motivations. It isn't just, here's an event, oh, by the way, these characters are also there. It's like, no, the characters are the focus. All the machinery and the spectacle of the disaster going on directly comes as a result of the decisions that people make. And that's just a basic of good storytelling, but it's definitely something that comes across in both of these audio stories. What they're also really good at capturing is the atmosphere of the disaster, the tension in the way the performances are given, the music, the sound effect. It's all just kind of really, it's just really exciting to listen to. And it feels like an original episode with the benefit of moving at an even faster pace. And that's not to say, it's fast paced, therefore you can't follow what's happening. It's just audio naturally just doesn't take as long to kind of establish what's going on. So yeah, you get that real sense of disaster, and it feels like, I can't say this enough, it feels like it's as close as you can get to a 1960s Thunderbirds episode produced today in an audio format. So I mentioned music. One of the really great things about all of the range of releases that Anderson Entertainment do is the music is by a chap called Joe Kramer, and what they do so well is take Barry Gray's score, which is obviously one of the greatest things about the original TV show. They take that score, and it's definitely inspires what the soundtrack is going to be, but it's an all new piece of music, new arrangement, everything like that. I'm not a very musical person, so I don't necessarily get the terminology correct, but it's a new sound, but it still sounds like the original series. And I think that's really good for audio in particular, because in the television series there are certain pieces of music that you very closely associate with certain scenes. For example, the fire flash landing in Trapped in the Sky. We all know that piece of music, and when you hear that piece of music, the first thing you think of in your mind's eye is the fire flash landing. So if you were to just take that original piece of music and put it in the audio drama in a different scene, in a different context, the problem you would then have as a listener is, as you're listening and you're visualizing the scene that is taking place, you're also going to have this music coming in that's going to make you think of the fire flash landing. And so you're never going to quite be able to separate the two. So I can see why people might think, oh, you should just use the original soundtrack from the television series. But actually having new music, I think, is better from a listening experience point of view. It makes it easier to let those moments be their own moments without having to rely too much on the television series and actually kind of causing a bit of a conflict there. So music is fantastic. I'd love to hear the soundtrack just, isolated on its own, because they're such great pieces of music. And then the use of sound effects, what's really nice is there's kind of a mixture of original sound effects from the television series that are used in the appropriate places. You've got when Thunderbird 2 launches, it sounds like Thunderbird 2 launching. But again, because it's an audio format, and because you don't have or need the big visuals of the protracted sequence of Thunderbird 2 launching, they're kind of able to condense it down, just use the key sound effects to convey what's happening, and then also supplement that with new sound effects just to allow the scene to have the same impact that the television visuals give you, but keep it, obviously on audio. So it's really nice, the combination of old and new sound effects to just enhance those moments that we all know and we can all visualize in our heads when we're listening. It just works really well, that combination of the two. And of course, just the general sound mix, the production quality is really high here. We're dealing with a very professional production, which I feel like sometimes people don't give audio engineering enough credit for making these releases feel as good as they do. Performance is one thing, but I think the editing and the post-production that has to go into it is also very, very important. Now, performances. Yes, this is a full cast audio drama with various different people playing different characters, and they are very definitely playing the 1960s original versions of these characters. That isn't to say that they are necessarily doing a straight, perfect, impersonation where you couldn't possibly distinguish the original voice artist from the new. I don't think that's the objective here, and I actually don't think that's necessary, because what every actor in this production does is they're able in their performances to capture the essence of the character. They've really kind of done their homework to think about how to play this character with their own voice. When you're listening to, Virgil or Parker or whoever, what you are hearing is very definitely that character. It's just maybe not exactly the same voice that you would have heard in the 1960s. And I think that's okay. And I think that's good. It actually kind of keeps it nice and fresh and interesting. You kind of just have to accept that these are not the same people recording these voices. So it's great. And what is so wonderful is that actually some of the voice cast are absolutely superb. They get absolutely spot on impressions of the characters, where it's actually kind of difficult to distinguish between the original and the new. But I think across the board, really, what you get is a performance that is authentic to the character. It's not just trying to mimic what the original actor did. So I think one of the standout performances in both of these stories is Genevieve Gaunt. She plays Lady Penelope. Primarily, that's kind of her main character from the series, and again, it's based on what Sylvia Anderson did, and it's a very close match to it. But it's the same character. It's not quite the same voice, but it's like the same character. The authenticity is there. The elegance, charm, and deadly danger, that Crichton Ward motto, is there in the performance. You can tell that that's what the performance is aiming for, and that's what she gets, and is able to go and have fun with it. With that character so established. Of course, they've done a series of these productions now, so all the actors are kind of very familiar with the characters at this point, and you can just feel that comfort and that familiarity with the characters is there. There's a lot of confidence behind the performances, which again makes for a very good, easy listening experience. But yeah, Genevieve Gaunt, Lady Penelope, very good. But I have to say that her performance as Soltan in The Space Mirror is, it's divine. It's like so fun to listen to. Like, for one thing, the character was originally male in the comic strip, but now Genevieve is playing it and decides to give it this French accent, which is just, you never know what she's going to do with it next. And you're dealing with a villain who is trying to build a space mirror in order to use the power of the sun to boil the oceans and evaporate Lake Geneva and all this stuff. So you're dealing with a big, outrageous character. So it fits perfectly that a big, outrageous voice would go along with it. And very good choice there. And I'm so glad that she committed to that performance and just really put on a show, which is what Thunderbirds is all about, really. It's about the spectacle of it, and the fact that you can even put that spectacle into the performances is just really, really good. So yeah, big fan of Soltan, for sure. You have Jon Culshaw playing Jeff Tracy and Parker and a number of other guest characters. He's just obviously a veteran of performing different voices, so his Jeff and Parker are actually pretty close to the original performances, but he just has a kind of natural ability with both of those characters to perform the new dialogue. As I say, it's easy to listen to. It's not like you can hear him trying too hard or anything like that. The characters just sort of come naturally. And I know for a fact that Jon thinks quite carefully about, what are Jeff's character traits, because obviously he's a leader and he's the boss. But if you were just going to play Jeff as the leader and the boss, probably wouldn't be a very likable character. So he takes other things into account, like he's a father and these are his own sons who are in danger. So there's a caring, nurturing quality in there as well, which I think is important to get across in the performance. And Jon really does that very well. So yeah, fantastic work by Jon Culshaw, as always. Justin T. Lee playing Scott Tracy and John Tracy. I mean, if Justin's Scott is hauntingly like Shane Rimmer. I mean, you couldn't have cast anyone better to play Scott than Justin. He just nails that voice, and obviously Justin is so familiar with Thunderbirds, having worked on the anniversary episodes and everything else, that you can just tell this is just a voice that he is naturally able to inhabit very easily, and yeah, just really gets that across. And that unique tone that Shane Rimmer had, Justin is also able to do great justice to, so love that performance as well. Virgil is played by Wayne Forrester, and this is a really interesting kind of characterization as well, because with Virgil, even in the original TV series, there were two different voice artists playing it. So who's to say what's really Virgil's voice, because there's already two different interpretations out there. So what Wayne does really nicely is, he's not under any pressure to sound like David Holliday or sound like Jeremy Wilkin. It's Wayne's version of the character, and he inhabits all of those traits that we associate with Virgil in that performance. He's, clear thinking, he's thoughtful, you can tell he's the softer, gentler of the brothers, and that all just kind of comes across in the performance. So yeah, you feel he's in command of Thunderbird 2 and is Virgil Tracy, so that works incredibly well. He also plays Brains. Brains doesn't have too much to do in these stories, but again, you listen to the voice, you know it's Brains. And then last but not least, we have Joe Jameson playing Alan and Gordon, which I really like these characterizations. He actually does a good job of making Alan very likable, which can be difficult sometimes. Alan can be a bit of a brat, and that's, no insult to the way Matt Zimmerman played it. That's just the way the character was written at the time. Alan's written with a lot more maturity in these stories, and I think that works really well with the way that Joe performs it, because he's got that same tone that Matt had when he was playing the character, but it's just a little bit different, and it works really well. Yeah, again, you get across that it is Alan, and you get across that it is Gordon. The voices aren't exactly the same as they were, but it's a very natural performance, and it suits the scene, and it means that, particularly Gordon, obviously, he's not the starring Tracy brother by any means. He has a decent amount to do in the television series, but he's not up there with like Scott and Virgil. But you can tell that even though he's kind of lower down on the pecking order, Joe's performance is still treating Gordon as a person rather than just a background character who has a few lines, and he's given a good amount to do in both stories, because some of the 4 features in Space Mirror and Blazing Danger. So yeah, those are the performances. The performances are kind of the standout feature of all this. It's kind of the bit that when they first announced they were going to do Thunderbird's audio stories, it's like, ooh, who are they going to get to do the voices? Is it all going to be different? Is it all going to be weird? It's not going to feel like the TV series. That is absolutely not a concern here. They really respect the original show and do things with it that you would expect to see in the series. So it's a very faithful adaptation in terms of who they have playing the characters and the way that they are performed. So, do I recommend Fire and Fury? Well, of course I do. If you're a Thunderbirds fan, these releases are just essential listening. I think they really are a continuation of what was going on in the TV series. And obviously, if you're a fan of TV21, of the comic strips, I think you will enjoy having those stories brought to life. It really feels like the original stories have been respected and have just been elevated to make their key features stand out even more brilliantly than they did before. So I think that this is a fantastic way to experience those stories again. And as a piece of audio drama, regardless of Thunderbirds, the production is fantastic, the performances are so good. As I say, the pace moves along really nicely, so you're certainly not going to be bored listening to these. Yeah, it's just a complete package. The production work is just really, really good. The fact that it has its own original music score is such a great bonus to the whole thing. And just on a practical note, what you also get with each story at the end is a bonus kind of feature with interviews with the cast, which is really good fun to listen to. It's clear that they're a bunch of really talented people who love to get together and perform these scripts, and that's really nice to listen to as well. It's great that we get to hear that side of it as well. You know, it's kind of unfortunate that with the original television series, we know a little of what went on at those voice recording sessions, but wouldn't it be great to be in the room and get to talk to the cast, you know, just after they've done a performance? What's great about these releases is that you do get that. It's great to have that little insight into what goes into making these things a reality. So yeah, love the bonus features. And then of course the design, like the cover artwork is just stunning and beautiful. You can see I've got some of the other releases here in front of me as well, and you know, they just look fantastic. So really, really great work all around. So that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed this review. Let me know if you want me to do other reviews like this. This is kind of the first one I've done, so if you are interested in seeing more, if you have anything you particularly want to hear me talk about, please let me know. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Anderson Entertainment presents Thunderbirds, Fire and Fury.
Blazing danger. The blaze is out of control.
I'm armed and dangerous when on a mission.
We're ready for anything, Mr. Tracy.
Give it up. You don't stand a chance.
Virgil, what's happening? Is everything all right?
Thunderbird Ford, come in. Do you read me? Gordon!
The Space Mirror.
Someone, anyone, payday!
FAB. Thunderbird 1 setting course for Lake Geneva.
Drop your gun and come out.
The shield is holding. I don't know for how much longer.
John, do you read me? Alan, we've lost contact with Thunderbird 5.